Welcome to Gateway Office Hours. Good morning. Happy Friday. I'm Ben Larson. I'm the co-founder of Gateway. And Carter is back. He is also a co-founder and co-host of here, Gateway Office Hours. Welcome to episode 65. We have an amazing guest today, Joe Vasquez, Forbes 30 Under 30, co-founder of Startx and Mickelson Runway, housed the Runway incubator in San Francisco. He's the co-managing director of Runway. Just an amazing guy. I've had the honor of mentoring with Joe and working with him at Founder Institute. We're happy to have him here in the building at Gateway. Just going to kind of explore his journey, overcoming obstacles and just really getting shit done in Silicon Valley. So, Joe, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Very excited to have you.
Thank you for having me. That's quite the introduction. I'm not sure if I could quite live up to it, but I'll try.
Well, you already have, from my understanding. So,
yeah. No, I remember when I first met you, I didn't know like you had any accomplishments. I just met you as I knew nothing about you. I met you as you were a mentor. I think we had you like mentor. You were at some Founder Institute event.
Mm-hmm. He actually turned to me. He's like, "Hey, Joe's actually pretty smart."
Yeah, I was like, "Oh, his feedback is awesome."
Yeah,
I like this guy.
Well, that's part of the reason why I got glasses, to make myself look smarter on appearance.
It works. Can you take them off for a moment so we can see? Oh, he is dumb.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
He's too good looking.
Makes quite a difference.
But yeah, really, you had some awesome feedback for founders and a lot of insight into startups. And it turns out that's because you've spent basically your entire career, it seems like, helping startups. Is that right?
More or less. I mean, I think it makes sense maybe to go back a little bit further.
Yeah.
I am originally from New York. My family is Cuban by heritage, at least on my dad's side. My mom's side is Eastern European, Jewish. And we came to the United States with the idea that you could build whatever you want here. And that's one of my favorite things about being a part of this go-getter, kind of do-good American culture. I went to an all-deaf school for about 3 years, where my first language is sign language. And sometimes my mom will order me around in sign language, even though I completely forgot how to do sign language. So if you're listening out there, hey, Mom. She's probably one of the few people actually watching this. Yeah. Well, many people.
So she doubled our audience. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mom.
Yeah. She's wonderful. And one of the things that I realized for the longest time is that I couldn't have gotten to where I am today without all of the people who supported me. Spent some time in the classroom as a high school math teacher through Teach for America, where basically the same foundational principles were there, helping kids to reach their opportunity as a teacher. And we have a lot of different ways that we can help people to reach their full potential. Through entrepreneurship, I found that as my calling. Started Startx in 2009 with a bunch of young people who wanted to create opportunities through entrepreneurship. So I spent time in the classroom through Teach for America in Richmond High. So if any of my former Richmond High students are watching, go Oilers. And now I'm currently at Runway, where I help people to create cool startups.
So I think a lot of people have a vague idea of what Startx is. Mm-hmm. Can you describe what Startx is a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So Startx was unofficially part of the Stanford University startup ecosystem. It was a 4-month accelerator program where we actively support and invest in leading startup affiliated entrepreneurs. And we're replicating a large part of that model at Runway now in San Francisco.
Isn't Startx focused on like really big ideas as well, or no?
Yeah, so I haven't been. We started it with the goal of helping people build big, audacious technology startups. I haven't been involved for quite some time, but always keeping tabs on the companies that come out, and it's pretty incredible. But it really shows you the power of great people and a great network. A lot of people have great ideas out there, and one of my favorite expressions is that talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. And fundamentally, I think there's smart, talented people all over the world who have the capability of building great startups, but they just might not have the resources there to do it. So I think it's incumbent upon me and all of us to really think critically about how can we build and create opportunities for people everywhere.
That's very similar to the Founder Institute model of like bringing Silicon Valley opportunity outside of Silicon Valley to other areas of the globe where they don't have the same resources.
Absolutely, and you guys did a fantastic job with that, so hats off to you.
Ben gets credit for that because I basically only did stuff in Silicon Valley. Ben was in charge of like half the world, I think. He did most of the world. So
Yeah, it was the whole method was globalizing the Silicon Valley like mantra, and just kind of that Silicon Valley was a mindset and not a place. And it's totally true, and it's exactly how we've approached the cannabis industry. You know, an industry that was historically pretty black market and siloed. People were more focused on eating other people's dinner than they were on collaborating and the concept of co-opetition and all that. So
you're one of the reasons that we are in cannabis, though, kind of indirectly.
Do you know indirectly. Can you explain on that?
Yeah.
He's like, uh-oh.
Yeah, it's your fault. Weed Club is in Runway, and they had a pitch competition that Ben, I think I attended, but you attended first and like did some pre-work at it. But we both went to the Weed Club pitch competition, and that was one of the things that made us interested in actually getting into the cannabis industry was the Weed Club pitch competition. So it's partly your fault.
Partly my fault.
Yes.
Well, I will gladly take partial fault.
Okay, awesome.
And it's great because we hear stories like that all the time where a random introduction will lead to some type of collaboration down the road. And the idea that serendipitous encounters in a physical space where you just have great people, great things happen with that. It's pretty cool.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about, you've seen a lot of different startups at this point in your career. Not that you're old, but you've seen a lot of different startups.
I am balding, by the way.
Are you 30 yet?
Not quite.
Still eligible.
So you're not allowed to claim that you're getting old. It's
Okay, fine.
okay. You've seen a lot of different startups. On the one hand, I think there's this. It's a good thing to kind of tell people that they can do it and give them opportunity. But on the flip side, actually a lot of people can't. And there's failures. Can you talk about maybe what qualities are necessary in a person to really help them succeed and make it all the way through being a founder?
And I want to kind of, challenge the
Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there is some truth to what you're saying, but I also want to kind of caution people to say that failure isn't inherently bad. And in Silicon Valley, the mindset is, at least from what I see, that failure, especially if you're learning from it, is a great opportunity to improve and grow. So I would encourage people that, if you want to go out there and try and make something happen, if you fail, that's okay, as long as you learn from it and grow from it. 95%, something like that, 98% of startups fail.
Yep.
So it's a pretty high percentage, and that's something that comes with the territory of trying to build something great. So I wouldn't want to discourage people from that. Then you kind of get into tricky territory when when you start to say things like people might not have inherent qualities that you need for being an entrepreneur. I would say that the most diverse people actually have some of the most critical qualities to being entrepreneurs. Overcoming adversity, understanding diversity, having different perspectives and mindsets are really fundamental to building some of the best startups. So there is a lot of kind of gray area when it comes to thinking about diversity and some of the best startups. And something that we think about every day.
Yeah. I guess this is an interesting conversation because my immediate reaction to that is, sure, I totally agree with that. But I'm trying to put the hat on. I'm putting myself in someone's circumstances, which I've seen before, where a founder will blow all of their life savings and go into debt to fail at something that we kind of knew they were going to fail at. And it's easy when you have healthcare and an apartment or a job and a house to be able to say, failure is good for you, you learn from it. But it's really hard if you just blew your life savings and end up in debt after that failure.
Totally.
So, I feel like especially in Silicon Valley is very wealthy. And there's a lot of wealthy people in Silicon Valley who can sit back in their armchair and say, yeah, failure's great, go ahead and try it, it's not a big deal. But it's like, yeah, that's because you can call dad and have another $500K wired into your bank account if you fail. Like, it's not a big deal.
No, absolutely.
So how do you, most people aren't in that situation, actually. Most people are much more paycheck to paycheck. And some of them are awesome founders, but some of them also need to make a decision at some point during their startup of like, how do I know whether I should shut this down and wait and try something later because I've learned a lesson enough and it's not going to go well? Or like, do you encourage them to just keep going until you're dead? Like, what's the...
That's a great point. There are, and this really touches on kind of the broader systemic issues and institutional biases that really prevent people from taking the risk in the first place. Intergenerational wealth transfer, I would say, is one of the biggest problems of our time. The accretion of wealth in such a small percentage of the population really inhibits a lot of people's ability to pursue ultimately what they're passionate about. So at the end of the day, I think we need to be doing everything that we can to provide some type of foundational support to people who want to take that risk. Some things that we're looking at are, broader universal basic income. How can we provide people basic income so that they could pursue what they're passionate about? Now, that's further down the road. There are more philanthropic programs like Camelback Ventures and other early stage or seed stage venture programs that will provide space, a little bit of funding, and support for people to take that risk in the first place. Yep. But you're right. I mean, the unfortunate reality is I'll look around the room, I'll look around Runway, I'll look around most of the startup spaces, and it's 85, 90% white or upper middle class people. Mm-hmm. And we really want to change that paradigm. And if you don't mind me going a little bit further.
No, please.
I have a lot to talk about this. I hope you guys are ready. But I would say it's even incumbent upon specifically the marijuana industry to think more critically about how can we include underrepresented groups into what is a booming industry. Mm-hmm. And I think there's so much opportunity, especially, the Clinton administration and so many administrations in the past have effectively criminalized large swaths of the population under the pretense that drugs are inherently evil. Yeah.
Ever since the Reagan administration, right? It's
all the way back,
or
right?
Nixon. If we're going to go back
to the 20s,
we can blame Anslinger.
Right.
But yeah,
totally.
So this is interesting because something else that I wasn't in venture capital until very recently. It's weird to be in venture capital now because I was a founder. And something that I've noticed, I would say more now than when I was a founder trying to raise money. When you're trying to raise money, you never know why you don't raise or you do raise or something happens. It's very opaque. Mm-hmm. But as a VC, I'm on kind of the other side and I see what happens a little bit. And one thing that struck me was how much of an old boys club the funding is, where it's like, oh, we shared dorms at Stanford, or I know this guy from my days in Harvard, or I know this other guy from Princeton, and it's all this very insular. It's these groups of people that went to the same university, and they just connect with all the Ivy League schools, basically, or the top schools, we'll say. They just connect the groups. If the Stanford group gets together with the Harvard group, and they know someone from the Yale group, and they know someone from the MIT group, and they got everything, they're done. And maybe add Princeton or whatever, and they've got coverage. Mm-hmm. And if you're not in one of those groups, it can be amazingly difficult to be taken seriously and get even the chance to have a serious shot at pitching.
Totally. Absolutely. I mean,
I didn't mean that to be a rant. I'm like,
Is there a question?
pretend that was a
yes.
question and respond.
Not sure what to say right now.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, the prevailing kind of problem with the industry right now is that it's predicated on signals and pattern matching. Signals are things like where your diploma is from, what your degree was, your age, all of these things that are not right. I mean, all of these things that are not inherently reflective of your core ability of building a great startup. There are a couple of cool organizations that are trying to change that. Specifically K-Poi Capital, which is in Oakland. They do a lot of great work. And Social Capital as well. So Chamath and the whole team at Social Capital are creating a platform to evaluate some of the core indicators for startups to be successful.
Right.
There's an interesting trend of using data analysis and machine learning to predict what startups will be the most effective without even looking at the skin color, the background, et cetera, of the founder. So fundamentally, I think the venture capital industry is ripe to be disrupted. And I'm excited to be a part of that.
Yeah. I want to kind of. It's weird to say because we're part of the venture capital industry, but part of me wants it to burn to the ground and get rebuilt. So,
I hope you have an insurance policy on this.
I know, right?
I don't mean literally.
Yeah.
It's weird because I didn't grow up in Silicon Valley, and when I came here, years ago, I viewed it as a meritocracy, and it is more than other places. That's true. I got to give it credit. It's more of a merit. We were just talking before the show. It's more of a meritocracy than the East Coast tends to be, at least where I grew up. But it's still not really a meritocracy. It's still only a semi-meritocracy, and I think we're missing out on a lot of really great ideas and businesses as a result. And there's a lot of capital wasted as a result.
And I'm curious from both of your perspectives, how is Gateway ensuring that maybe A, it's being fair, but maybe B, aligning more towards meritocratic principles or ideals that you're touching on?
I love that this has become an interview about Gateway, but
well, I mean,
that's fine.
We start by both disliking the whole kind of construct of focusing on someone's network in their school and focusing more on their grit. And you were talking about this, like overcoming the obstacles of their past and what that builds into someone and their ability to achieve, right? Like you yourself have overcome personal obstacles, and it probably makes you someone that drives harder and faster than some of your contemporaries, right?
I like to think so.
And so we do look at that. When we interview people, I mean, I don't know. I look around the room.
Well, first we look for glasses.
Right.
So that's
no, but I look around the room and I couldn't tell you where any of these guys went to school, right? Like I have no idea.
He probably went to school somewhere in Colorado, but that's just because everything he's done has ever been in Colorado.
Yeah, sure, but it's just.
Is that right?
No.
Oh, I'm not even wrong. I'm wrong even. He went to Virginia. The one thing he did outside of Colorado was go to school. Okay. Yeah. No, I think kind of to answer the question. A lot of it is just trying to get deal flow, and frankly, the hardest part is getting deal flow.
Getting people to apply, right? Like we talk about disparities in race and women and trying to get them into the program, and we sponsor events, we'll talk at events, we'll do educational things specifically to those demographics, and it's like, email me directly, call me directly, I will pick up the phone, I'll take a meeting. And still, it's just like pulling teeth sometimes. And so I think the cannabis industry in particular is a little bit of a special case just because there is the stigma that exists. And some people are more sensitive to the stigma and having it applied to their reputation, which I can totally understand. But I think this exists in tech, too. And I think there's like a systemic issue of people just feeling automatically that the deck is stacked against them. Right.
It's hard to measure. So, I mean, there's two things. One is just getting the applicants, and it's hard to measure whether we're doing well or not. It feels like we're not, but I don't know if that's because of something we're doing, or if there's some other systemic issue where they don't want to do it and it has nothing to do with us. I don't know.
I mean,
I don't. Yes, right, sure, but I don't want to just say like, if I just say that, then there's no onus on us to do anything. So I can't just chalk it up to like, oh well, that's the system. Fuck it, right? So we gotta try and improve, sure. But I think one thing that I Princessa and I talk about this all the time. I hate colleges. I hate universities. I never, ever donate to your university ever. The system needs to be burned to the ground. Fuck universities.
Can we stop saying burn?
I'm burning. I'm in an arson mood today.
Not good. It's sensitive in Northern California.
Your insurance premiums are going up by the minute. Right?
Yeah, right.
I forgot about the fires in Northern California. I apologize. Only burn if you're in a wet area. But where I lost my train of thought. Oh, we don't care. We don't. When we analyze businesses, we tend to not. We don't care where they. We don't even ask where they went to school. We don't care. We are very focused on the founders, and we actually use. We have a psychometric test that we use not to actually screen people in, but just to give us data, and then we do a lot of trying to analyze them as a person and figure out, do they have the grit and do they have the kind of what it takes. We don't necessarily care whether they have the background or the network or they went to a particular school, but it's also hard to measure how well we're doing. Right? We're doing, we think we're doing well, but I don't know. How do you do it?
That's a great question. So a couple of things. Our first cohort of startups that we invested in through the Michelson Runway EdTech Accelerator, where we were, we really set out with goals of investing in underrepresented groups. We had 300 startup applicants apply to the program, specifically focused on a very niche market, post-secondary, adult, and vocational training, which is a pretty small market.
Yep.
10 out of the 30 startups were led by women founders. Probably another 10 or so were led by African American, Latino, or other underrepresented minority founders. We did everything that we could, right?
Yeah. No, those are great results too.
And the thing is, it's one thing to step back and say, hey, we did everything that we could. It's really incumbent on us to try even more. There's a lot of things that could be we could have done better. Maybe our language. More often than not, language really reflects and could potentially turn a lot of people away. We look at things like microaggressions in the workplace. Now, people are like, what the heck is a microaggression? Things like using certain pronouns, for example, he, she, they. If you use it in...
The train is always a guest.
Yeah, trying to interrupt our...
The train is microaggressing against you right now.
Oh, damn it. But yeah, I mean, we try to think about things like language. We oftentimes try and get out of the room and go to places that maybe we are, the minority in that group. Mm-hmm. And that's okay, because we need to be actively putting ourselves out there and hanging out with people who don't look like us. I think that's a moral imperative, a moral responsibility, and something that we as investors should be doing more of. I don't even know what the original question was, though.
That's okay. I have a follow-up anyway. Do the sponsors, whoever is it, Mickelson is sponsoring most of it, right? Mm-hmm. Do they grant you money with an earmark that like this is for this particular? We want you to invest in minorities and disenfranchised groups, for lack of a better term?
There is no specific benchmark for how we allocate that money, and the money is coming directly from the foundation. The education space is unique in the sense that really, at the end of the day, customers are students, and outcomes are student achievement. Right. So we want to make sure that the money is philanthropically or mission aligned with the outcomes that we want. Right. So we were very thoughtful about that particular program. If we run funds or programs for corporates, it would look very different. We use something called an MRI, which is a mission-related investment. The money comes from a 501c3 foundation, and it's used to support a for-profit startup, which is actually an interesting new trend that's going on right now. We don't have specific benchmarks for number of minority founders on teams, something that we actively push
But the
on
money is philanthropic, like for that purpose.
for the purpose of increasing access, persistence, and completion of higher education. Correct.
So I want to point out a nuance, and there's something different because a lot of funds don't have money with a purpose. They have money, and the purpose is give me more back, right? And it's a very cut and dry, make the best investments possible. I want a high return. I don't care about anything else. And so the fund managers, defending fund managers for a moment, even though I can't stand venture capital, the fund managers are under a directive to I need to just make the bets that I think are most likely to give capital returns and not really focus on philanthropy at all, because I could get in trouble.
Totally.
Right?
I have a question, or maybe just like a general rhetorical response, is that the idea that a lot of investors believe that investing in underrepresented groups is inherently philanthropic, or, oh, we're just investing in these groups because we want to do good in the world.
Right.
In fact, women-led startups tend to perform better than men-led startups.
Right.
So there's this kind of a challenging nuance where people's like, I'm going to invest in XYZ startup because I want to do good for the world. But there's a very high likelihood that they're going to outperform mainstream traditional startups.
That's a good point, and I think if you can, it's a fine line to walk between making an investment purely because you're trying to do something philanthropic and making an investment because you think their potential is really high and you can do something philanthropic sort of at the same time. And like it's a fine line to walk, because there are also lots of examples of people who give philanthropic money away and it doesn't go well.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, Juicero, for example, or
Juicero is my favorite example. And no, I know it's that's the other problem that we're talking about, of like giving money to your bros or whatever, right? Yeah.
I mean, you see it time and time again where a startup will get $100 million or $50 million for a juice squeezer that is meant to be sold to people that look like you and I.
That's right. You know what? You're making a really good point, which is like there's capital wasted anyway.
Well, that's not what I was trying to say, but
no, that's what I'm taking away from this.
No, it brings up an interesting point, though. It's just like, if you ask a different venture capitalist, depending on where they are in the kind of value chain, for us, because we're seed stage, getting people to that next level and watching who struggles at the Series A level and watching who's pulling the strings there, it's like, it creates a lot of nuances to that who's going to succeed question, because we've watched incredible founders that are performing very well, and it takes them forever to raise their next round, and it's just like, this is so frustrating, and like, how do we fix that? And it's like, similar to a question I received last night, it was someone was like, how do we fix it in an industry as a whole when there's like all this in the cannabis industry, like government regulations that are causing a lot of the systemic problems, and it's like overwhelming to consider. And like, yes, we can continue to do everything that we can, but how do we really start kind of evoking this chain along the whole value chain so that we can justify those those investments to keep moving?
Totally. I mean, I just want to say, like, hats off to everyone here for even just having this conversation in the first place, because A, it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. B, a lot of people don't feel like they're the right people to have this conversation. So the fact that you're having it is just a step in the right direction. This is something that for a long time has been swept under the rug and is starting to really become more mainstream to talk about it. So that's a great first step. One other thing that I encourage all of us out here is to think about the distinction between mentorship and sponsorship. Mentorship and sponsorship are two, they sound like the same thing, they kind of look like the same thing, but they're inherently different. What do you mean? Yeah, absolutely. So we all mentor tons of startups, right? We have startups coming up asking for introduction, support. We'll give them feedback, light touch. That's inherently what a mentor is. Sponsorship is someone that is really invested in you as a person, that's invested in your outcomes, and that's willing to put themselves on the line for your benefit and not just their own. A sponsorship is someone who will proactively go to bat for you. They're willing to support you in any way possible, much more than any mentor could. And it's incumbent upon people with positions of privilege to really be sponsors for those who don't have it. So
yeah, there's actually, so locally there's some great programs that I've had the benefit of coming into touch with. Youth Business USA is doing great work, and here I think they just renamed them. Sky's the Limit is what they renamed to, but it's helping kind of the underserved entrepreneurs in Oakland. Not necessarily, in venture capital, we always have a tendency to focus on, the big scalable venture backable startups, but there's a lot of other entrepreneurial ventures out there that can really benefit from our perspective, right? Even if it's a small business, there's a lot of foundational things that you can impart on a new entrepreneur.
Totally.
And there are programs that you can get involved in, and it is very rewarding to be able to kind of like sponsor these people and work alongside them. So if you are interested in that, I do encourage you to kind of like go out and check out these programs, because they're out there. People don't talk about them a whole lot.
And if anybody out there is interested in taking the risk and looking to put some skin in the game and really build something unique and valuable, I think all three of us here and everybody here, hopefully I'm speaking for everyone here, we're all willing to help you take that leap and build something really meaningful and valuable.
Well, and at the core of it, I mean, that is kind of the mantra of Silicon Valley, right? Like at Runway, you have 30,000 square feet of entrepreneurs just trying to get it done, but a lot of that time is spent like collaborating and helping each other out and connecting networks and stuff like that. So it's kind of expanding that mantra about paying it forward, but like beyond your kind of initial circle, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we start that conversation by just getting a lot of people in the room, having fun. Usually a couple beers and board games are involved, as always. But just getting people comfortable with each other and building that sense of community, it really goes a long way to facilitating those kind of atomic collisions to make new compounds, if you will. So that's something that we actively think about all the time. Is like, how can we make our events, our programs more, sorry, might break this thing, more, I guess, accessible. I don't know what's going on.
You really love that microphone, don't you?
Yeah, I need to stop moving my hands so much. It must be the sign language from when I was younger.
Right.
It's coming out. But how can we make our programs, our community, our space more accessible? Not even just for people of color, but people like myself, people who might have different abilities. How can we really think about all of that to create a space where anybody could come in, feel comfortable, be themselves, and try and take a risk? Yeah.
So I want there's a question that I want to ask, but to ask it, I think I need to make waves in the conversation we just had, and so it's a fun conversation. I want to make waves in it.
Yeah.
I was thinking about something you said. You said you started by saying talent is, I think, like universally dispersed or something. I forget the words you used. Right?
Yeah. Evenly distributed.
Evenly distributed. Thank you. And I was thinking about it, and I'm going to take issue with that because I don't think it's true. I think it is widely dispersed, but not evenly distributed, because, and this is just based on my experience with founders, like there are some people, regardless of their, let's just talk about so that there's no race or gender coming in, like two white guys from Stanford. One might be a horrible founder and one might have what it takes to be a great founder, and I don't know I'm not saying whether it's like what the cause of that is, whether it's their own drive or their own desire or their own decisions they've made or whatever the cause. I'm not making a claim about why, but there is a difference between people, and not everyone should be a founder. Not everyone should, like, I make a horrible COO, right? I will never be a good COO.
Okay.
I'm not well organized. Like, I was just talking to one of our companies before, and I was like, I'm the guy who's going to be like, oh yeah, I forgot to pay taxes last year, right? Like that's like, I'm not a good COO, right?
Michael, can you check on that?
Right? I know that about myself. And there are other people who maybe just are not comfortable painting a vision or whatever, and they have the different skill set. And there are other people, I'm also a bad employee. Which is why I had to be a founder. Like, I'm a horrible employee.
Right.
Yeah, right. I'm a horrible employee. Right. So, and every time I try and go back, like, I would get acquired and go try and be an employee, and it would turn out like I actually hated it and sucked at being an employee. It seems a little bit simplistic to kind of say, oh, everyone has what it takes to be a founder. We just have to give them opportunity. That's not true. What it takes to be a founder is distributed everywhere, but not everyone has it.
Okay.
So, first of all, before I ask my question, is that like, do you disagree with that premise? Should we have a conversation about that?
Okay. I will ask you a question and response first.
Okay.
And then
This is getting
answer your
very
question with the
interesting.
question.
I'm going to answer your question with the question.
This is great. This is great.
Do you think habits, personality traits, etc., are learnable, teachable, and maybe buildable within people?
I think there is, as far as, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a social scientist or a psychologist.
Okay.
As far as my understanding of the modern science knowledge is that a large component of personality is genetic and a large component is environmental, and we're not sure really how to do too much. I mean, we know if you beat your kid every day, there'll be problems later on, but beyond things that are obvious like that, we don't really know how to affect some of those traits. So I don't know that the science is totally settled, but we do know some is genetic and some is not genetic.
Can I just add on to that really quick? Because one thing that I have noticed, and you hear this from venture capitalists a lot, it's like what they look for in a founder is grit. Because we know being a founder is not easy, right? So you have to have grit to be able to push through the obstacles. And having gone through those obstacles early on in life kind of trains you to have grit. And so that's where the opportunity is created as a founder, right? It's like, oh, I know I can push harder than the guy next to me, and I'm gonna be the cockroach that keeps on living when he dies.
Right.
Right.
But there are,
Or
but you see people like Tony Robbins is a great example of like someone with a bad childhood who turned it into like massive success. And then there are people who had a bad childhood and turned it into living in tent city, right? And being an alcoholic. And I'm not putting all the blame on them necessarily, but like there is differences that there's paths the paths diverge, right? And so I don't know why. I don't know. The answer is I don't know the answer to why,
Totally.
but I know from experience they do diverge and people do have different skill sets and personality traits.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of it is environmental, more than we'd like to admit. A lot of it is about the people that influence you. One of my favorite quotes in the world is, you are the average of the 5 people closest to you. And really, I mean, at the end of the day, if you had parents, aunts, uncles, grandfathers who are there to support you and teach you the right way, that will give you the foundational skills and mindset to be able to navigate difficult challenges. The unfortunate reality is that a lot of people who go through troubling times are not, they might not be able to approach or navigate issues the right way or the way that makes sense. But I think people can learn that, and people could develop those skills.
That's the question. I agree with everything you've just said. But I don't know that once you're an adult, you're that malleable. I've never seen any evidence that you can massively change when you're an adult. Like, it's very difficult after the age of 25 or so when your brain is done to really make big changes. And I've not seen any empirical data that suggests that you can take, people who've had, obviously one-offs you can. It happens, but statistically, generally, it's a problem, right? And so I'm not saying that's not a reason to not try or do anything. My question is really like, when you have a group of people, doesn't matter what their race or gender is. I'm not talking about that. Let's just say you have 2 people. One of them you may look at and say, okay, that person's got the qualities I think will make a good founder because they have the grit, they have this, they have the other. And the other person doesn't. Could we save them? Maybe, but we don't know how. There's no evidence. There's no program for knowing how. And if you're an investor, that's not really your field of okay, I'm going to correct the psychological issues with this person, and while I'm giving them money and they're running a startup, you've got to make a decision, which is all right, the person who seems to have the qualities I got to go for.
I feel like we could talk about this all day.
I want to talk about it all day.
I hope you guys have enough time.
I'll give you 15 minutes.
Okay.
I need another cup of coffee right now. No.
Right.
By the way,
tequila.
I think something you said earlier about having this discussion is important. I totally agree with. I think the reason people don't have these discussions is because they get very sticky and difficult, and people are worried about saying the wrong thing and then being like, "Oh, I didn't mean it that way," and then like just being vilified. So I'm appreciating that you're wanting to have this discussion. Let's have the discussion.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as long as we don't, end up in a BuzzFeed article, I'm completely cool with having this conversation.
Right. We'll get the boxing gloves out afterwards.
I'm going to call you a Nazi at the end, and that'll be the end.
So one thing that I was, thinking about in the back of my head is it true that there's one archetype or one mold that the best founders fall into?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
And there's my understanding is there's 4 leadership archetypes, right? You have people who are visionaries, thought leaders, who are the creative types, which sounds like you are.
Maybe probably.
Is the bulldog a type?
I don't know. There's probably like a fucked up misanthrope type category. I'm not sure that's a leader, but I'm in there somewhere.
Yeah.
I didn't say I was a good leader either.
He's good at finding visionary co-founders, right?
Right, and so
I'm not sure I'm very good at that, actually.
it's like, but you guys have very different personalities, very different leadership styles. Does it make one a better founder than the other? Maybe not necessarily.
Well, no, but you're bringing up an interesting point. So there have been studies about what it takes to found and run a company in terms of psychological traits. And there is, if you go by like the there's a Big 5 personality is like the only kind of empirical psychological way to talk about personality. Everything else is kind of Carl Jung masturbating onto some paper. You didn't like that one. I got an eye roll.
now I have this mental image in the back of my head.
Sorry, audience.
Off the rails.
But so 2 of those traits, we don't have to get into all of them, but 2 of those traits, one of them is openness. It's like openness to new ideas, and the other one is conscientiousness. It's rare to find both in the same individual, which is fine. You can, but it's very rare. Usually high openness has lower conscientiousness and vice versa. Now, it turns out that higher openness is actually really valuable for starting a company and being that visionary. But high conscientiousness is kind of necessary to not forget to pay your taxes and to keep the company running and actually functioning and profitable, but not great at starting it. So that's why a lot of times you see dual founding teams where you have like you've got Jobs and Wozniak, or you've got like this yin and yang founding team who one guy's got the high openness and the other guy's got the high conscientiousness, and they make a great, or gal or whatever, and they make a great team.
Is that something that you 2 have?
I don't know. I probably have
we're
low
missing
everything.
a piece still.
Yeah, we're probably missing something.
Could use a third. Michael, we have Michael.
Sorry. Michael has high everything, so he skates fine. He's perfect in every way. But so I guess the question is like I don't even know what the question was. My point is like we do know that there's some kind of differences, and there's some traits that are necessary, but we don't really know a lot. And I don't think we can answer the question of like if I say, here's Joe's psychological profile, would he be a good founder? I don't think we can know unless there's some like obvious, he's like completely neurotic and like suicidal. Like, okay, well, that's probably not. He might not survive to be a good founder, right? But other than that, like other than obvious red flags, I don't think we do know a lot about
what makes a great founder.
What makes a great founder? We know some flags about stuff to be worried about, but I don't think unless you know. I don't think we know.
Well, so that's the question I have, and I don't want to steer the conversation in a direction that you don't want to take it. But
I was going to ask him what were the qualities that he thinks there, but we've not even gotten to that question. But go ahead.
Well, so yeah, like relating that to what he currently does at Runway and the Michelson Accelerator. What are the qualities that you look for in founders when bringing them into the program, right?
Mhm.
You have a different lens than most venture capitalists. So, for the listeners out there, and they want to get involved with what you're doing, like how do they impress you? How do they attract your attention?
Yeah, we, as I mentioned before, specifically the Michelson Runway program, which is an initiative of Runway, is very philanthropically focused, and we're very driven by student outcomes. You could hear what drives founders at the end of the day when you listen to what they have to say, whether they're constantly reiterating their social impact or really just focusing on their long-term IRR and revenue opportunities. So that, I think, is a special edge case because it is more philanthropically focused. We do look for things like openness, ability to think about issues in different ways. We like people who are willing to put themselves out there. I would say that the people who are willing to just reach out to an investor and take that risk in the first place usually have the same skill sets that they need to become effective B2B developer or business people, and like putting themselves out there, finding business opportunities. So the fact that they're willing to reach out to you and start that conversation in the first place is usually a good indicator that they're more likely than not able to build their business from there. So that's just one thing that we think about. We do look for teams that look like the people that we're trying to serve. So even if the founders themselves are not underrepresented, African American, Latino, LGBTQIA, as long as they're thinking about building that into their team, their culture, then we're cool with that.
Are there red flags that you kind of, when someone comes in, you're like, oh, wait a minute, this is probably not going to work out?
We have met a lot of founders with previous exits, and they have this air of arrogance to them. And we see this all the time in Silicon Valley, which is really unfortunate because more often than not, these people will have tons of talent. And I had a guy walk into Runway who had a $250 million exit, and a couple weeks later he comes in, and he kind of like looks at me. He asked me who I am, and it looked like he wasn't even paying attention at all. Just kind of like walked away, and I was like, this guy is a complete jerk. Like, why did he have to act like that? And I mean, we're all
he
people.
He had to also sell his soul for part of the $250 million.
Yeah, I mean, he got a nice house and a Porsche out of it, but I'd rather be a good person at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a pattern with founders that it's not obviously completely consistent, but I've seen it a lot where there's a first success, and then the business number 2 and sometimes also number 3 die, and the founder either like stops founding and goes and like lives with his house and Porsche, or like reverts back to kind of their roots and like regains their kind of normalcy and founds and like succeeds again. Have you seen that at all or no?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think I've seen a lot of founders with 6-figure exits. I've met a couple founders with 7-figure exits, and a lot of them do want to get back and use the opportunity that they've been given to give other people a shot.
Yeah.
I would say it's more. I'm a firm believer that we're all inherently good people. I like being optimistic. The glass is 3/4 full.
Thanks, Chris.
And I do like to believe that at the end of the day, we are, mostly good people. So I think there are people who want to give back, but they're always, bad.
But do you think bad people are redeemable?
Bad people are what?
Redeemable.
Redeemable.
It can be shown
This
the
is
light.
I'm asking
really-
you're very optimistic. I'm enjoying this conversation.
I sense someone has a guilty conscience right now.
I'm totally guilty of everything.
Yes.
At least you're honest about it, right?
Yeah, I don't have a conscience, so that's the part where you were wrong. Am I redeemable, Joe?
I do think people are redeemable. And I think it's important to admit that we're all flawed and we're all human. Because once we get to the point where we start attacking people for misdeeds or things that they say, really limits our ability to grow and heal from the things that we did wrong. That being said, I mean, we do need to give people the platform to call out other people and say, hey, like, you did this. Like, it was a pretty shitty thing that you did. Let's talk about it. Let's work through it. You should have to pay the consequences for what you did, but I believe that you can be a better person and grow from that.
I think that's a great, outside of founding, obviously, this is clearly a higher level discussion than just founders, but I think that's a great point to make just in the times we're living in right now where, there is a tendency to just pile on someone and paint people as like, they're either Luke Skywalker or Darth Vader, and there's nothing in between. And it's like, okay, you fucked up. That thing you said was wrong, or we disagree with, and blah blah blah. But it doesn't. Maybe it even came from an ignorant or a good spot, and it doesn't make you through and through evil.
Totally.
There's just some education in a conversation that needs to happen now, and maybe consequences, and then.
And that's why we're here, right?
Yeah.
And one thing that I was thinking about before, but didn't really get a chance to talk about, is the idea that if we're going after philanthropically minded endeavors and missions, that is not inherently profitable. We do think about something called the base of the pyramid, which is basically the bottom 75, 80, 85% of the population that might not have disposable income in the way that they could afford juiceros and other pretty arbitrary stuff. I don't know why I keep talking about
Did you know that it was like a sensitive point for Carter, so it's just like, it's funny that you keep saying it.
I know.
Sensitive.
We're not sensitive, it's just a
it's a hilarious
topic.
point for Carter.
Yeah.
Juicero was my favorite thing ever.
But I think systems, we're designing systems in a way where we could reach scale, especially economies of scale that could reach large swaths of the population and create immensely sustainable and profitable businesses. We're improving manufacturing, improving supply chain, improving how that whole process works, so that we could drive down the price point and reach consumers in mass markets that we weren't able to do 10, 15, 25 years ago. I think it's incumbent upon more hardware and consumer-type businesses to really understand how supply chain works and how manufacturing works and how all of that works, so that we could drive price points down and reach economies of scale, so that we could drive multi-billion-dollar businesses with segments of the market that have not been able to access those products before. And that's social impact in a vastly different way. And it's not social impact in the traditional sense, but it really is impactful.
So I'm going to ask you to invent solve an impossible problem live. Ben earlier mentioned small businesses that don't have the kind of like venture trajectory of, they're not going to be bought by Google for $500 million, right? But maybe they're a local business that could sustain a family and a community for decades, right? How do you scalably bring the early stage accelerator and venture kind of help and startup ecosystem expertise to those businesses where, the only reason that it happens now in the startup world is because 1 out of 20 of them becomes Uber and it pays for the rest of them, and that's why people do it. How do you do that for smaller businesses that will never be an Uber, but probably be pretty good?
Totally. That's something that is not being done enough of. I would say the success rate is higher, so the distribution or the bell curve. I agree with you. So the bell curve is more likely to support a wider swath of people. Technology, just by nature of how technology is built, it's easy to build a website. You need a couple developers. You get it out there, and it becomes a viral hit. And then suddenly you have millions, if not billions of dollars concentrated on a small group of people. Where an SMB or SME or whatever you want to call it usually needs to scale its HR and personnel with the amount of dollars that they're bringing in, more or less. Right. Sometimes you could increase efficiency, and it's maybe not perfectly correlated. Right. There are programs out there. One, I want to give a shout out to the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative, which is out of Stanford, run by a good friend of mine named Teak Chapa. And he's helping Latino entrepreneurs create lifestyle businesses that can employ 15, 20, 30, 40 people, as well as tech startups. They have everything across the board. These Latinos are building amazing companies that are defensible, strong, employ tons of people, and make great cash.
Yep.
I would say that's better than what a lot of people are doing in Silicon Valley right now.
Yeah, sure.
We need a lot of that.
Yeah, they're kind of the strong, slow growth, nice, not the unicorn trajectory, but nice, like solid, slow growth companies. I spoke to a guy a couple weeks ago who he's actually an angel investor, but he was not from tech. He started with like a lawn mowing service, and just like owns a bunch of, now he like owns some landscaping businesses, and like he's, I don't know, 60, and he spent decades building his landscaping businesses, and now he's got a couple $1 million to invest in some things, and that's what he's doing. But it was a great reminder to me that like, we live in this bubble where we think the only business is the one that's the app that scales or the cool VR tech or whatever it is, and that's not true. I mean, he basically jokingly said, my whole life has just been about making tall grass short. Just like,
Okay.
all right, that's a real business and employs a bunch of people and has a life and has become wealthy.
I have a question for both of you. I do think that there's a huge opportunity for venture capital in the marijuana industry. So there's no debating that. I do think that there's an even bigger opportunity for more traditional investment vehicles, whether, all the different investment vehicles outside of traditional venture capital to profit and build within the marijuana industry. Do you have a particular perspective on?
There is that opportunity from, if you ignore the realities of the banking system and legality, there's an opportunity there. But once you insert the fact that banks won't touch you and a lot of bigger traditional businesses won't touch you, I think, and for a lot of those opportunities, unfortunately, cannabis businesses end up having to take hard money loans at usurious interest rates, where if you were starting a dry cleaner, you would pay half or a third of that interest rate. And maybe the bank would just give you the loan. Instead, you're talking to some shyster who wants 40%, right? And yeah, there's an opportunity there for someone who's willing to take those risks to come in and do other types of investment. But from the founder perspective, they're hard to find, and there's a lot of predators out there.
I mean, a lot of the way that I see it is a lot of the marijuana industry is everything, manufacturing, agriculture. So that might not have quite the economy of scale that software does, which is where software is really the sweet spot for venture capital.
And there's quite a few.
Talk about Flocana though, for example, too, right?
Well, so Flocana is a business, but from the financing standpoint, there are a lot of private equity firms that are coming onto the scene that are helping fund these different types of businesses, and often, going in and maybe owning 50% because they're putting up a lot of capital. Yeah, but Flocana is a cool concept that's happening in the industry, and I think there's a big opportunity outside the cannabis industry. But they're taking this kind of small mom and pop farms and giving them power to kind of as a network and centralizing manufacturing and distribution for them so they can focus on growing. And
they get the scale of big ag without being big ag.
And with the movement of agriculture and food and people like eating local. I think there's a big opportunity for that to spread into mainstream agriculture and giving power back to the local farmer. So there are cool things happening in the cannabis industry. We often talk about it as being a beachhead to improving other industries and just innovating here, because there is a lot of interest and capital coming into the space. So using that for good. I want to start transitioning towards the end of the show.
I just looked at the clock.
I have a
I'd
couple.
like to apologize.
I have a couple quick points. So you mentioned that there's so many negative pressures from the outside that is forcing people to innovate from within, and you could use that as a model for building into the tobacco industry or whatever other industries as well. Right. And that's a real. I think a real case study of the fact that when you face adversity, sometimes you're forced to innovate in a way that other people might not be able to. Which
maybe opportunities coming from obstacles.
No, in fact, I mean, we talk about Metal as an example all the time, but like Metal is a cryptocurrency company that came through Gateway, and Metal.
I love Metal, by the way.
Yeah,
Thank you.
They were just they were trying to solve how dispensaries take money, and now cannabis is a tiny part of their business. It's just everything else, and it's weird because the cryptocurrency space is huge, but no one else really did this. It was the particular challenges in cannabis that forced the solution, and then everyone looked at it and thought, oh, what a great solution for everyone.
Exactly.
Right? And
totally.
so we love those kind of businesses. Yeah.
At Runway, we're going to be launching a pretty big blockchain initiative in the next year or so. So we're very well aware of MetalPay. I'm on the advisory board of a Bitcoin wallet called Mycelium, which is one of the largest Bitcoin wallets in the world. Yep. Very interesting space right now, and we're excited to see where that goes.
Yeah, we can have a separate 3-hour show about blockchain sometime. I feel guilty.
I think there are some people falling asleep in the back right now.
No, but I'm sure. Do you have a question? Because
I do, but I think we're out of time.
I don't care that we're out of
fine.
time. You get your question.
Screw time.
It's okay. If Facebook cuts us off, we'll just post it on YouTube later.
So my biggest, I have a number of questions, but the biggest one that I'd like to hear addressed is how do we change the mindset of Silicon Valley and their thought process in investing in minorities or their lack thereof? Is there a way to do that? And I'm wondering, with your social mission, have you all had some thought around doing that?
Great question. First, I think we need to change the makeup of the people who are in control of those dollars in the first place. If you do not come from, identify with, or even potentially look like the people that we want to give those dollars to, it's really hard to connect with that person in a really meaningful way. So we, as investors, really need to be encouraging each other to diversify the makeup, the communities and our investment teams, even looking for diverse LPs as well. Our LPs really dictate where our teams really emphasize where those dollars go. So we really need to think about that whole supply chain, LP, GP, and ultimately who gets the money at the end.
Do you think the first, do you think there's more highly visible success stories will kind of tip the scales a little bit? I mean, I kind of feel like eventually money talks, and so if someone's like, oh, look what we missed out on because we were ignoring this whole class of people, they'll stop doing that.
Totally. I mean, we definitely need to highlight all of those success stories because there's tons of them. There's great women-led. I mean, Stitch Fix, for example, is IPOing, and they have an amazing business. They're revenue positive. I could name 15 male-led startups that have IPO'd, and they're struggling to even break into the black. So we definitely need to highlight all of those amazing success stories, reevaluate our teams internally, and do everything that we can to have these conversations.
Well, there becomes a point in time where the movement is happening at the corporate level too, right? And so there's a point in time where the conversation switches from startup investing to corporate, C-level structure and that kind of stuff. And I do see a lot of companies, especially in the cannabis industry, where they're pushing the women executives to the forefront and having that be a strong part of the brand. And I think that is helping quite a bit as well.
Totally. I think in the past 5 years or so, there's been a 17% increase in the number of women in senior executive positions within corporates, somewhere around there. But there's been a decline in other underrepresented minorities, LGBTQIA, Black, African American, Latino. So it's that 17% is mostly white female.
Oh, that's the Huffington Post phenomenon. That's what I call that, right?
The what?
The Huffington Post phenomenon.
The what? Huffington.
Right.
I mean,
it's like an entire boardroom full of white women.
Yeah,
talking about how diverse they are.
that's definitely a good.
Am I right, Princessa? Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, that's a step in the right direction, but we need to make sure everyone is included. Otherwise, it's just going to be more white women in positions of power. We need a lot more women in positions of power, but we also need to stand up and fight for Black women, Latino women as well, and make sure everyone's included.
All right. Well, I think we've kind of gone over. Is there another pressing question we should do, Princessa? Or
Lou.
Lou's got a pressing question. So pressing that he's going to make us go later. This better be good.
All right. So the question that I'll ask is probably one that we've all been like skirting around a little bit. How do you guarantee diversity of ideas instead of diversity of just skin or ethnic races? That doesn't necessarily guarantee diversity of ideas that are worthy.
How do you
Is
guarantee?
that a separate show that you just brought up?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no. I would love to hear.
He can ask you afterwards.
Well, no, I'm just saying, like, it's from my perspective, when you bring in and encourage diversity, it's a diverse perspective oftentimes. Not necessarily. I mean, you have diverse people at Stanford going through like the fraternity system and all that, but if you're out there and constantly pushing it, it's just that diverse perspective. And it's like, I don't know. I think about there's a company that's focusing on creating shavers for Black gentlemen, that shave their head often, and it's just a complete different like razor design, and it's doing a phenomenal job at addressing that market's needs. And it was just never done before. Like years and years and years of Gillette creating shavers, and not once was this problem ever solved. So it's kind of crazy to like think that an idea like that still has the opportunity to emerge. That's a diversity perspective, which inherently comes from diversity, I guess.
No, I mean, I think Lou. I mean, it is a separate show. You're because like there are countless examples of relatively diverse groups that all have the exact same ideological thinking, and that is a problem. And also there's groups who are, more homogeneous from kind of aesthetic measurements, but very diverse ideologically. But you've got. I want to hear your answer, and then we got to stop the show because we're late.
Okay, so to your point that homogeneity in thought, and so a lot of people who are against the whole, like the broader diversity movement, really are. They ask the question, well, just because a team looks diverse doesn't mean that they're necessarily diverse in thought. And that is a really tricky area to fall into, because that doesn't, that kind of holds you back from really thinking about what diversity even looks like in the first place. Because to your point before, I mean, building a different razor design based on, your physical traits presents a unique opportunity that a team of white men probably would not have thought about in the first place. I would say that we need to be doing everything that we can to create more diverse teams, but also creating space for teams to come up with unique and diverse ideas. More often than not, boardrooms, meeting rooms, and meeting teams are not creating the space where people could take a risk and come up with unique, crazy ideas. So we need to do everything that we can to reevaluate our processes internally to encourage everyone to come up with unique ideas. Specifically for me, I'm deaf, hard of hearing. It's really hard for me to speak up in a team meeting because I'm worried that I'm going to say something stupid like taco, fish, or rice. I probably wouldn't say that, but...
you just did.
But thinking about how we could create teams and processes that give everyone the opportunity to come up with unique, crazy ideas that are different outside of the mold. For me, I like using Post-it notes. I like using more written ways to express my ideas. So how can we create safe spaces for people with heterogeneous mindsets to challenge the convention, challenge the mold? Maybe that might come from a team that looks like you, but more often than not, it comes from people with different experiences than your own.
On that note, I'm sorry, I gotta end.
Joe,
because we're way late. Thank you so much for coming. Yes.
Yeah.
You have
amazing
closing
conversation.
Yeah.
Like that took the show in a different direction than it's ever been taken before. So
Cool.
thank you very much for having the conversation. I'm glad we could always experience this with you, and it's just very clear to me that like you've gone along a similar path through working with startups that we've found ourselves in, and it's a realization that a lot of working with founders and working with startups, there's a very large part of it that's psychologically driven.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about capitalism, and it's not just about building companies. It's understanding what this is all built upon and who we are as founders, and that's a really important topic and something that's not discussed a lot in Silicon Valley. So again, very much appreciated. It was an awesome discussion. Next week, is it Adeo?
Oh shit.
Oh God.
Speaking of
All right.
bald men,
Yeah, and
Adeo will
and
be
tough
with us.
conversations, which we'll have to censor.
I will be watching that one.
Yeah.
He will definitely swear. You failed us, but he will swear.
Next week,
Oh,
we
God
have
damn it.
Adeo Ressi on the show, Founder Institute CEO and our former colleague, good friend, and just, personality. Let's just leave it at that. Looking forward to it. Join us next week. Thanks again, Joe. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thanks. Thanks, man.
Thanks a
That
lot,
was
guys.
awesome.
Appreciate it.
Totally.